2 weeks ago, the Idaho Republican Party held a statewide caucus to select their presidential nominee. Here to discuss the caucus and other issues is Idaho Republican Party Chairwoman Dorothy Moon. Chairwoman Moon, thank you so much for joining us today. How do you think the caucus went?
Well, Melissa, first of all, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be in studio. I think the caucus went great. Contrary to some of the reports, I have seen nothing but thankful emails and letters and phone calls that they really enjoyed the social aspect of it, where people can actually get with community members and talk about the candidates or talk about other political issues. And every one of them had a different flavor. There's 976 precincts in this state. But there were 210 locations statewide. And some locations would have maybe 20 precincts represented, some might just have one. And anyway, every one was a different size, some large, some small, but they moved fast because this was a firehouse caucus, very different from the one in 2012.
There was some confusion over the end time, and I spoke to a precinct committeeman who said that each of the 210 sites had local control on when to end the caucus, but that resulted in some confusion. I know when I was leaving, there were still people showing up in the parking lot who were really disappointed because they were hoping to vote for every one of them, Donald Trump.
Sure.
Is that something that you want to change for next time?
Live and learn. I was there for the 2012 caucus, which was very different because you were locked in until you came up with a 50% plus one, and I was in Chalice at the time. But, there are things that you learn. Now, Firehouse Caucus, we knew we had a very short window to prepare for a statewide presidential preference caucus, and we had to make sure that we had all of the components in order of getting the ballots printed, on getting the poll books printed, the list of registered voters at the end of the year that we were using to make those poll books. So we had a lot to do in a very short amount of time, and the Firehouse Caucus made the most sense. We could have had a convention, which would have allowed a little over 700 people only to vote for our presidential choice. And we knew the citizens of Idaho had already been disenfranchised with the passage of HB 138 last year, and this was the best fix for that issue.
That was the bill that got rid of the presidential primary.
Correct.
For those who weren't familiar. Were you expecting the 7% turnout?
I was hoping for more. 10% is what the 2012 caucus produced. We had quite a few issues on March 2nd. We had the issue with a huge snowstorm, and actually we had someone put out a map demographically for each county with blue and red, and blue is where there was light turnout and red, of course, higher. So in southeast Idaho, they had a couple of feet of snow dumped on them over a 2-day window, as well as Rocky Mountain Power went completely out in Idaho Falls and Rexburg. So people were calling, are we still having a caucus with the power out? And of course, well, yes, they're paper ballots. You just have to mark one time and you can place it in a ballot box. So that was very light turnout on the east side of the state, but then also like Valley County, higher elevations, because of snow, had a lighter turnout.
In the future, other than maybe a unified close date, what would you do differently?
Of course, the absentee ballot issue was an issue. If there is, we can determine some mechanism to where we could put out ballots earlier. Of course, there's always going to be a problem even with that. Who did we leave out? We did have a lot of areas that would allow people who needed to do curbside voting. Some caucus locations actually had them run out with a poll book and take care of those folks. Everybody tried to handle every situation to the best of their ability. And we can just try to strive and make sure that in time we have a better situation on that. But again, what I just told you, we had very small locations and large locations. But a firehouse caucus is just that. It moves fast, and it did move fast. Even at the ones that had 18,000 Republicans, where at least 3,000 to 4,000 showed up.
There are currently a couple bills that would deal with a presidential primary, establishing either a presidential preference vote during the May primary or creating a new date in April. Wanted to get your thoughts on those bills that are currently in the legislature.
Well, first of all, it's not my decision, it's the decision of the State Central Committee. And last year in Chalice, after the loss of our presidential primary in its entirety, the State Central Committee voted to either do a convention or to do the caucus. They decided on the caucus, and the wording in our rule says either give us back the March presidential primary or we caucus. It was very cut and dry, and that is in our rules. So I cannot just change the rules now. had anyone with the Secretary of State's office like to have met with the State Central Committee or the legislators who carried these bills and discussed it with the major stakeholder, maybe something could have happened. But as far as this April date, no opinion on it whatsoever. According to our rules, we want the March presidential primary back, or we will caucus.
Do you anticipate those rules changing now that you've been through that firehouse caucus and seen the 7% turnout?
You know, I think most of our members really like the caucus, and maybe we can still caucus, even if they choose the April date in 4 years. And that's the other big consideration, Melissa. Why are we talking about this now? And it's just because it's fresh in everybody's minds. And some people were irritated at the fact they couldn't get into their venue because it closed earlier than they expected. However, you know, we really need to sit down. I think they should pull back on this April one. I know the one for May coming out of the Senate is not even probably going to go anywhere because it puts an emergency clause to put it on the May legislative ballot. We've already got our presidential choice. We don't need to appease people by putting that on there. But as far as we're concerned, it would be nice if they would just hold off on these. We have 4 years. 4 years. Let's meet, let's have a committee, and let the Republican Party State Central Committee meet with anybody who brings any bill forward after today.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit. Earlier in the show, we did have Representative Stephanie Mickelson from Idaho Falls, and last week the Bannock County Republican Party voted to censure her and Senator Kevin Cook. I wanted to get your take on that. That came as the result of a rule change again, it was a rule change, I think. From
yes, it was a rule change.
Right, from the state Republican Party allowing counties to do this.
Okay, and that was Bonneville County. And in Bonneville County, they have their meetings, they make the decisions. And you know, there's a lot of autonomy with this rule. The idea is that if they are not representing that community, and again, Idaho's very different all the way from North Idaho and over to Southeast Idaho. And some things they do tolerate, and other places they don't tolerate. But if they're not following the platform, then a county has the right or a prerogative to go ahead and try to meet with that legislator and see, well, why did you vote this way? But my understanding is she hasn't even met with the committee, and that's about all I know. I've been busy right now canvassing our caucus ballots, and so we've been pretty preoccupied with that.
You know, the Republican Party is a private organization and can set its own rules and hold these hearings. But taking a step back from the positions and actions of elected officials, what would you say to voters who identify as Republican, who support these candidates and in some cases have for years? If they see the central committees and the county parties doing this, are you worried that they're not going to feel welcome in the Republican Party if the candidates that they support and they actively vote for are being censured in this way? Well,
I think the main thing is that, you know, I made no bones about it when I took up the gavel, is that we want to make sure that our Republicans adhere to the platform, and not necessarily 100%, but a majority of it, and honor our Idaho and U.S. Constitution. If somebody has been supporting a candidate without really knowing their voting record, to me that's kind of unfortunate. I definitely would love to see a more informed electorate who actually does track how their legislators vote. But again, that may not be the case. They might be friends who, you know, just go out and work out together. But the fact of the matter is votes matter, and that's your indicator of how you should go, if they're going your way or not, or if you think they should vote a different way, you need to speak to them. But, you know, you've got to remember that these central committees are voted in by the precinct committeemen, 976 of them. So they have been elevated to that position to make these decisions. And it is a private organization, and they need to follow the rules, or at least have some semblance of voting with the Republicans through the legislative year. And sometimes they don't. And so that's why these counties have been calling them out.
But very briefly, would you welcome those voters who support their voting record, who look at it and say, you know what, I'm with them, I agree with it?
Well, sure. I mean, because that might just be one issue. Mm-hmm. It might be one issue, but maybe they still want property tax relief or grocery sales tax exemption. So you bet.
And we are going to have to leave it there.
Okay.
Chairwoman Moon, thank you so much for joining us this week.